The screen of my phone lit up with a name that was my world. My son, Leo. Just his name, nothing more. But my thumb was already swiping before the thought finished. The message was 6 words. 6 words that made no sense and yet seized the air in my lungs. Don't eat dinner tonight? I stared at them, my brow furrowing. What kind of message was that from a 17-year-old boy? A prank? Some strange meme I didn't understand? I was standing in the kitchen, the warm, fragrant steam of the beef casserole rising from the oven. A dish my husband, Mark, had specifically requested. He'd even bought the ingredients, a rare and thoughtful gesture that had touched me earlier. I typed back, "Why? Is this a joke?" But my finger hovered over the send button. Something held me back. A cold sliver of unease, sharp and unwelcome. It was the same feeling I'd had last week when I saw Leo watching his father across the dinner table, his expression not one of teenage sullenness, but of something deeper, something unsettlingly close to fear. Or was it hatred? I dismissed it then, as mothers often do, attributing it to the moody whims of adolescence. But now the memory returned with a chilling clarity. The phone buzzed again, still in my hand. It was Leo. "Just don't, please, I love you." The last 3 words were a punch to the gut. He hadn't said that, not without prompting, in years. The casserole timer beeped, a cheerful, oblivious sound in the suddenly heavy silence of the room. I reached for an oven mitt, the message replaying in my mind. Don't eat dinner tonight. It was absurd. It was a casserole. But the urgency in his plea, the raw emotion in "I love you," rooted me to the spot. Mark walked in then, smiling. "Smells incredible, honey. I'm starving." He was still in his work suit, his tie loosened, the picture of the successful, weary husband returning to his sanctuary. He leaned in to kiss me, his lips cool against my cheek. "Everything okay? You look pale." I forced a smile, tucking my phone into my pocket. "Just tired. Long day." He nodded, his eyes scanning the counter, the salad I'd prepared, the bread warming in its basket. His gaze lingered on the oven. "Should be perfect right about now," he said, his voice smooth as butter. "Let's not let it get cold." He was right. It was just a silly text from a dramatic teenager. I was being ridiculous. I turned toward the oven, my hand outstretched, and in that split second, as my fingers brushed the hot metal of the handle, my phone vibrated one last time in my pocket. I didn't need to look. It felt like a final, desperate pulse, a warning. I stopped. I let my hand fall to my side. "You know," I said, turning back to Mark, my heart hammering against my ribs, for a reason I couldn't name. "I'm not very hungry, actually. Maybe we could wait a little while?" His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes tightened. A flicker of, what? Annoyance? Disappointment? It was there and gone so fast I thought I might have imagined it. "Don't be silly, Clara. You cooked all afternoon. We should enjoy it." He stepped forward, reaching for the oven mitt himself. "I'll get it." His hand was on the handle, and that's when the house shook. It wasn't a tremor. It was a violent, deafening concussion that threw us both sideways. An explosive roar tore through the warm domesticity of our home. The sound of 1,000 plates shattering at once, of walls groaning and splintering. Plaster dust rained down from the ceiling, and the lights flickered, then died, plunging us into a disorienting twilight. Mark had instinctively thrown his arms around me, pulling me to the floor, shielding my head as a portrait of us, smiling on a beach in happier times, crashed from the wall behind me. For a moment, there was only ringing in my ears and the acrid smell of burnt chemicals. Then The car alarms on the street started wailing, a chorus of synthetic screams. My first thought, a panicked, jumbled mess, was for Leo. Where was he? Was he okay? But he wasn't home. He was at the library, he'd said, studying for finals. Then the memory of his text cut through the chaos, sharp and terrifyingly clear. Don't eat dinner tonight. He knew this was going to happen. The explosion had come from the kitchen, from the oven where the casserole was. Mark helped me to my feet, his hands surprisingly steady. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice strained but controlled. Clara, are you okay? I nodded, unable to speak, my eyes fixed on the doorway to the kitchen. It was gone. In its place was a gaping, blackened maw, smoke pouring out in thick, gray billows. A small fire licked at the doorframe. A gas leak, Mark said, his voice a little too loud, a little too certain. It must have been a gas leak. He was already steering me toward the front door, away from the destruction. His grip was firm, proprietary. We have to get out, now. But I couldn't move. My gaze was locked on the wreckage. It wasn't just a gas leak. I knew it with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the floor beneath my feet. Leo's message wasn't about an explosion. It was about the dinner. The explosion was something else. A mistake. A backup plan. What had been in that food? My body was moving, propelled by Mark's insistent hands, but my mind was frozen on that single horrifying question. Mark was already on the phone with 911, his voice a mask of panicked concern, as he guided me onto the front lawn, away from the smoke and the sirens that were now growing closer. Neighbors were spilling out of their houses, their faces a mixture of alarm and curiosity, but I wasn't watching them. I was watching my husband. He stood there, the perfect image of a shocked homeowner, yet his eyes kept darting back to the house, to the ruined kitchen, and in his gaze I saw not fear, not loss, but a chilling, calculating assessment. He wasn't looking at what he had lost, he was looking at what had failed. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing lights, the urgent chatter of radios, and the kind, concerned faces of strangers, firefighters, paramedics, police officers. They moved with a practiced efficiency that felt alien in the context of my shattered home. I sat on the curb wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, a cup of lukewarm tea trembling in my hands, answering questions I could barely process. Yes, we had a gas stove. No, I hadn't smelled anything unusual. Yes, the oven was on. Mark handled most of it. He was a rock, everyone said so. The way he comforted me, the clarity with which he spoke to the fire chief, the calm authority he projected, it was admirable. He looked every bit the grieving husband, his face smudged with soot, his arm protectively around my shoulders. But his touch felt like a cage. His comfort felt like a performance. The fire chief, a man with a kind, weary face, finally came over to deliver the preliminary verdict. Faulty igniter on the oven, looks like, built up gas in the chamber, and when the thermostat kicked in again, boom, you folks are incredibly lucky to be alive. Mark nodded gravely, squeezing my shoulder. Incredibly lucky, he echoed, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. Case closed, an accident, a freak occurrence. Everyone accepted it. The neighbors murmured their sympathies, the police packed up their notebooks, the fire trucks began to roll away. It was all so neat, so tidy, too tidy. The lie of it sat in my stomach like a stone. An accident would not have prompted a text from my son that said, "Don't eat dinner tonight." An accident wouldn't explain the cold, hard glint I'd seen in my husband's eyes. While Mark was busy talking to an insurance adjuster who had miraculously appeared on the scene, I slipped back into the house, ignoring the yellow tape. I needed to see. The kitchen was a disaster zone, a blackened, dripping cave of what used to be the heart of our home. The force of the blast had blown out the windows and torn the cabinets from the walls. In the center of the room, twisted and mangled, was the oven. Its door had been ripped from its hinges and lay halfway across the floor. And there, amidst the debris, was the casserole dish. It was shattered into 100 ceramic shards, its contents a charred, unrecognizable mess. But as I stared at it, a memory surfaced. Mark, coming home yesterday with a bag of groceries. "I got that special organic ground beef you like," he'd said, "and I picked up a new spice blend from that gourmet shop downtown. Thought we could try it in the casserole." He never bought groceries. He never cared about spice blends. He'd handed me a small, unlabeled shaker filled with a fine, grayish powder. The guy at the store said to be generous with it really brings out the flavor. I had trusted him. I had mixed it in without a second thought. Now the memory made me feel sick. What was in that shaker? My phone, still clutched in my hand, felt heavy. I had to talk to Leo. I dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. A wave of panic washed over me. Where was he? Was he safe? I called his aunt, Mark's sister, Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. "Clara, oh my God, I just heard. Are you all right?" Her voice was shrill with alarm. "I'm fine, Sarah. Is Leo with you?" "I can't reach him." There was a brief pause. Yes, he's here. He showed up about an hour ago, poor thing. He was a wreck when he heard the news. Mark called me, told me to keep him here for the night. Said the house was a mess, and you two needed space." Every word was a lie. Mark hadn't called her after the explosion. He'd been with me the whole time. He must have arranged this beforehand. He was controlling the narrative, controlling our son. "Let me talk to him," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Oh, honey, he's sleeping. The shock of it all just knocked him out. Let the poor boy rest. Mark said you're going to a hotel. You just focus on yourself. We'll take good care of Leo." She was stonewalling me. A polite, concerned, unbreachable wall. Before I could argue, Mark was beside me, gently taking the phone from my hand. "It's okay, Clara. I asked Sarah to watch him. He doesn't need to see all this." He ended the call and put the phone in his own pocket. "Let's go. I've booked us a room at the Westin." He was isolating me. From my home, from my phone, and now from my son. As he led me to our car, the one that had been parked safely on the street, he kept up a soothing monologue about insurance claims and restoration companies. But I wasn't listening. I was piecing things together. The life insurance policy he'd had me sign 6 weeks ago. It was a massive one, far more than we needed. He'd called it responsible planning. The late nights he'd been working, the hushed phone calls he'd take in his study, the way he'd been meticulously tracking our finances, something he'd always left to me. It all painted a picture, a dark and terrifying masterpiece of deception. The explosion hadn't been Plan A. Plan A was in that casserole dish, now buried under rubble. Plan A was a quiet, untraceable death that would have been ruled a heart attack. Leo must have discovered it. His text wasn't just a warning, it was a desperate, heroic act of defiance. The explosion, it must have been Mark's panicked, clumsy Plan B. A way to destroy the evidence when he realized I wasn't eating. He'd set a trap, and when the prey refused the bait, he'd tried to blow up the whole forest, and I was standing right next to him. The hotel room was sterile and impersonal, a beige box of forced tranquility. Mark had ordered room service, but the thought of food made my stomach churn. He insisted I eat, hovering over me with a plate of dry chicken and steamed vegetables. "You need to keep your strength up, Clara." His concern was a performance, a meticulous act for an audience of one. Every gesture, every word was designed to reinforce his role as the caring husband. But I could see the cracks in the facade. I saw the way his eyes, cold and watchful, followed my every move. He thought he was managing a grieving wife. He had no idea he was sitting across from a woman who was beginning to see him for what he truly was, a monster wearing her husband's face. I needed to get out. I needed to find proof. But how? He had my car keys, my wallet, my phone. He had claimed he was just taking care of things, so I wouldn't have to worry. It was a gilded cage, and he was the ever-present warden. My chance came the next morning. While he was in the shower, I saw his laptop open on the desk. It was a long shot. He was usually so careful with his passwords, but desperation made me bold. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. Our dog's name. Nothing. Then I remembered something Leo had said weeks ago, complaining about his dad's new obsession with his legacy. I typed in the name of the company Mark's grandfather had founded, the one that had gone bankrupt a decade before Mark was born, Ellington Steel 1928. It worked. The screen opened to his desktop, a clean, organized grid of icons. I didn't have much time. My hands flew across the trackpad, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I clicked through his emails, his documents, looking for anything. Financial statements, insurance policies. Then I saw it, a folder on his desktop innocently labeled Household Projects. Inside were not schematics for a new deck or paint swatches for the living room. There were dozens of browser bookmarks, pages from obscure chemical supply websites, articles on toxicology, forum discussions about untraceable poisons. My blood ran cold. One link stood out, a detailed scientific paper on the properties of succinylcholine, a neuromuscular blocker. It could induce cardiac arrest and, crucially, was difficult to detect in a standard autopsy. The article mentioned it was sometimes available in a powdered crystalline form, the grayish powder from the shaker. He had been researching my murder for months. I scrolled further, my breath catching in my throat. There was a saved email exchange with a company that sold lab equipment. He had purchased a single 100 ml vial of the substance, claiming it was for a university research project. He'd used a fake name and a P.O. box, and then I found the final damning piece, a draft of an email in his trash folder never sent. It was addressed to his sister, Sarah. The subject line was simply contingency. The email was short and chilling. The casserole is prepared. If anything goes wrong, stick to the plan. He stays with you. No contact. I'll handle the rest. He and Sarah were in this, together. They had my son. This wasn't just about money. This was a conspiracy. Sarah, who had always been so sweet to me, who I'd thought of as a sister, she was complicit in the plot to kill me and was now holding my son hostage. The sound of the shower turning off jolted me back to the present. I quickly closed the folder, my mind racing. I couldn't just copy the files. I had no USB drive, no way to send them to myself without leaving a trace. I had to remember. I took out my compact mirror from my purse and angled it, pretending to fix my makeup while using its reflection to see the laptop screen. I took a mental snapshot of the chemical name, the name of the supply company, the date of the purchase. I had to burn it into my memory. Mark came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a white hotel towel, rubbing his hair. "Morning," he said, his voice casual. He glanced at the laptop, then at me. For a terrifying second, I thought he knew. I thought he could see the knowledge in my eyes, but he just smiled. "Feeling any better today?" I met his gaze, my face a carefully constructed mask of fragile grief. "A little," I lied, my voice quiet and unsteady. I can't stop thinking about the house." "I know, honey, it's a nightmare," he said, his voice dripping with false empathy. "But we'll get through it. We just need to stick together." He walked over and shut the laptop, a definitive click that echoed the closing of a cell door. He thought he had erased his tracks. He thought the fire had consumed his first attempt, and that I was too broken to see the truth. He was wrong. I wasn't a grieving wife anymore. I was a prisoner, and I was a mother whose child was in danger. His overconfidence was his weakness. My feigned weakness would have to become my strength. I had no evidence I could hold in my hand, but I had something more powerful. I had the truth, and I would use it to tear his world apart, piece by damning piece. I just had to get to my son. The next 2 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I played the role of the shattered, dependent wife to perfection. I let Mark make all the decisions, from what I wore to what I ate. I cried at opportune moments, spoke in a hushed, trembling voice, and clung to his arm whenever we were in public. I made myself small, fragile, and utterly broken. It was the most exhausting and important performance of my life. He, in turn, blossomed under the attention. He was the hero, the stoic husband holding his fragile wife, together in the face of tragedy. He lapped up the sympathy from friends and family who called, his voice a perfect blend of grief and strength. He told them I was too distraught to speak. He was building a narrative, brick by brick, of my mental collapse. A collapse that would be so convenient for him later. He thought he was in complete control, but with every lie he told, every pat on my back, he was underestimating me. He didn't see the cold, hard resolve solidifying in my heart. He didn't realize that while I was playing the victim, I was also studying the warden, learning the patterns of his patrols, searching for a weakness in the walls of my prison. My one goal, the thought that kept me going, was Leo. I had to get to him. I knew talking to him on the phone was impossible. Sarah would be listening to every word. I had to see him in person. I began my campaign subtly. "I miss Leo so much," I'd whisper at night, my voice catching. "I just need to hear his voice." Mark would pat my hand. "He needs time to process, Clara. We all do." Sarah said he's still very shaken. It's better for him to be away from all this chaos. He was using our son's well-being as a weapon against me. The next day, I escalated my approach. I faked a panic attack in the hotel lobby. It wasn't difficult. The terror was already thrumming just beneath my skin. All I had to do was let a little of it out. I sank to the floor, gasping for air, my hands trembling. It was a convincing display. Mark rushed to my side, his face a mask of public concern. But I saw the flash of irritation in his eyes. I was becoming an inconvenience. In the room, as he brought me a glass of water, I made my move. "I need to see him, Mark," I said, my voice weak but insistent. "I can't do this without seeing my son. Please, just for a few minutes. If I can just see that he's okay, I think I can be stronger." I had framed it not as a demand, but as a need tied to my recovery, my ability to maintain the facade he wanted. To refuse would make him look cruel and controlling, a crack in his perfect husband veneer. He hesitated, weighing his options. I could see the calculation in his eyes, A short, supervised visit might be better than dealing with an unstable wife having public breakdowns. "All right," he said finally, his voice tight. "All right, Clara, we'll go tomorrow, just for a little while, but we go together." "Thank you," I breathed, a wave of genuine relief washing over me. It felt like a victory, the first small chip in the wall he had built around me. The drive to Sarah's house the next day was suffocatingly tense. Mark drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a brand. He kept up a steady stream of small talk, pointing out landmarks, commenting on the weather, a desperate attempt to maintain a sense of normalcy that was laughably absurd. Sarah's home was a pristine suburban colonial, the lawn perfectly manicured, the windows gleaming. It was the picture of domestic bliss, a sterile container for a monstrous secret. She greeted us at the door, her arms open, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Clara, you poor thing, come in, come in." Her hug was cold, her perfume cloying. She was a good actress, but her eyes, like her brother's, didn't quite match her smile. They darted, nervously between Mark and me. Leo was standing in the living room. He looked pale and thin, his shoulders slumped. When he saw me, his eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of hope and fear before a blank, shuttered expression took its place. He was under their control, coached and terrified. "Hi, Mom," he mumbled, not meeting my gaze. My heart ached. I wanted to run to him, to hold him and tell him everything would be okay, but I knew I couldn't. Mark and Sarah were watching our every move. "Hi, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with real emotion this time. I walked toward him and hugged him tightly. His body was stiff, unresponsive. I held on for a moment longer than was natural, my lips close to his ear. "I know," I whispered, so low that only he could hear. "I know everything. I need your help." I felt a tremor run through him, a barely perceptible shudder. He pulled away, his eyes still fixed on the floor. The four of us sat in the immaculate living room, the silence punctuated by Sarah's inane chatter about school and the weather. It was a surreal, nightmarish parody of a family visit. Mark kept a tight grip on the conversation, steering it away from the unpleasantness. I needed to get Leo alone, even for 30 seconds. An idea sparked. I reached for the glass of iced tea Sarah had placed on the coffee table in front of me. With a trembling hand that required no acting, I accidentally knocked it over, sending the dark liquid cascading onto my white blouse. "Oh, clumsy me," I gasped, jumping to my feet. Sarah and Mark were instantly on their feet, fussing, grabbing napkins. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. It's all over me. Could I use your powder room to clean up?" "Of course, dear. It's just down the hall," she said, dabbing at the carpet. "Leo, show your mother where it is." It was the opening I needed. Mark shot Sarah a sharp look, but it was too late. To object would be suspicious. Leo stood up woodenly and led me down the hallway. His steps were slow, hesitant. I could feel Mark's eyes on our backs. We had maybe 10 seconds alone, out of their direct line of sight. As we reached the bathroom door, I put my hand on his arm, stopping him. I looked directly into his eyes, pouring all the love and urgency I felt into my gaze. "Are you safe here?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. His eyes were filled with a terror that was pure and undiluted. His hand, hidden from the view of the living room, moved to his pocket. He pressed a small, tightly folded piece of paper into my palm, his fingers cold and clammy. "What was that?" Mark's voice called from the living room, sharp and suspicious. He was already moving toward us. I closed my hand around the note, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Nothing," I called back, forcing a lightness into my tone. Leo was just showing me the new paint color in the hall. "It's lovely." I gave Leo's arm a quick, reassuring squeeze and slipped into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I unfolded the note. The paper was a scrap torn from a notebook, the words scrawled in Leo's familiar, frantic handwriting. It was the proof I needed. It was the key. And it was a death sentence if Mark ever found it. Leaning against the cold tile of Sarah's bathroom, I read the note, my world tilting on its axis. The scrawled words confirmed my darkest fears and painted a picture even more horrific than I had imagined. "They're in debt," it began, the letters shaky. "Deep. Dad lost everything in some bad investment. Overheard him on the phone with Aunt Sarah. The insurance policy on you is for $2 million. That was the plan. The spice was poison, succinylcholine. I looked it up. He was going to put it in the casserole. I found the vial in his desk and he caught me. He freaked out, said I misunderstood. He locked me in my room. That's when he messed with the gas line. He said it was a backup in case you got suspicious and didn't eat. A way to destroy the evidence. I sent the text from my burner phone when he left the room. He took my real phone. "Mom, they're not going to let me go. They said you're having a breakdown, and they're going to get you help. They're going to try again. Don't trust them. Don't take anything from them. I love you." Every sentence was a hammer blow. The financial motive, Sarah's deep involvement, the confirmation of the poison, the terrifying fact that the explosion was a calculated act of destruction, and the chilling final warning, they were going to try again. They were going to use my grief, the trauma of the explosion, to paint me as unstable, to have me committed, or to create another accident that would seem plausible for a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I wasn't just a target anymore. I was a loose end. My survival was a complication they needed to eliminate. I quickly folded the note, my mind racing. I had to hide it. My purse was in the living room. My pockets were too shallow. I looked around the pristine bathroom. Under the sink? In the toilet tank? No, too risky. Then I saw it, my boot. I was wearing ankle boots with a small zipper. I sat on the closed toilet lid, slipped off my boot, and tucked the precious piece of paper deep inside, flat against the sole. It was uncomfortable, but it was safe. I splashed water on my face, took a deep breath, and composed my features back into a mask of weary sadness. When I emerged, Mark was standing in the hallway, his arms crossed, his expression impatient. "Took you long enough," he said, his voice clipped. "Feeling better?" "Yes, thank you," I said softly, avoiding his eyes. "I think I'd like to go back to the hotel now. I'm very tired." The ride back was silent. The air in the car was thick with unspoken accusations. Mark knew I'd had a moment, alone with Leo. He didn't know what had passed between us, and the uncertainty was eating at him. I could feel his paranoia radiating from him like heat. Back in the hotel room, his solicitous act returned, but it was sharper now, edged with a new menace. "You know, Clara," he began, pouring 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on the dresser. "I was thinking, this whole ordeal has been incredibly stressful for you. I'm worried about you." He handed me a glass. I took it, my hand steady. "I think you might need more than just rest, maybe some medication to help you sleep, to calm your nerves." There it was, the next phase of his plan. He was going to drug me, make me groggy, confused, pliable. He would create the very symptoms of the breakdown he was claiming I was having. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I looked at the glass of water in my hand. Did it have something in it already? The paranoia was a cold serpent coiling in my gut, but Leo's warning echoed in my head. "Don't take anything from them." I walked over to the window, pretending to look out at the city lights. It's just all so overwhelming. With my back to him, I discreetly poured half the water into a potted plant on the windowsill. I turned back, the glass now half empty, and took a small, deliberate sip. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. Over the next few days, he became my own personal pharmacist. He brought me vitamins in the morning, a mild sedative at night. Each time, I perfected the art of deception. I would palm the pills, hiding them in my fist while pretending to swallow them with a gulp of water. Later, in the privacy of the bathroom, I would flush them down the toilet. I was a ghost in my own life, floating through the days on his schedule, eating what he ordered, saying what he wanted to hear. All the while, the note in my boot was a constant, secret reminder of the truth. I needed to get that information out. I needed an ally. But I was trapped. Mark never left me alone for more than a few minutes. He took every call on speakerphone. He screened every text. He had become a smiling, ever-present jailer. My opportunity came in the form of a billing error. The hotel had charged our room to the wrong credit card. Mark had to go down to the front desk to sort it out. It was a 10-minute window, maybe 15. It was everything. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, I sprang into action. I retrieved the note from my boot. I didn't have a phone or a computer. I had to use the hotel room's phone. It was a risk. He could have the calls monitored somehow. But it was the only risk I could take. My mind raced through a list of people I could trust. My family lived out of state. Mark could easily spin a story to them. My friends, they all thought he was a saint. Then a name came to me from the past, Frank Gable. A retired detective, a friend of my father's. He had known me since I was a little girl. He was sharp, cynical, and had a built-in distrust of smooth talkers like Mark. More importantly, he was retired. He had no official capacity that Mark could manipulate. I found the hotel stationery and a pen in the desk drawer. My hands trembled as I transcribed Leo's note, adding my own frantic explanation. The poison, succinylcholine, the financial motive, Mark and Sarah's conspiracy. My fear that they were going to kill me. It was a rambling, desperate message, but it contained the truth. I had no way to send it. I couldn't leave the room. Then I saw the fax machine integrated into the hotel phone. It was an archaic piece of technology, but it was my only hope. I looked up Frank's security consulting firm online, using the hotel's slow, clunky, television internet browser. The number was there. With my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, I fed the single sheet of paper into the machine and dialed. The machine whirred to life, its grinding sound deafeningly loud in the silent room. Each second felt like an hour. I imagined Mark stepping out of the elevator, hearing the noise, the door swinging open. "Come on, come on." Finally, the machine beeped, signaling the transmission was complete. I snatched the original note from the tray, tucked it back into my boot, and shoved the hotel stationery I'd written on into my purse to be destroyed later. I had just sat down on the bed, smoothing my clothes and trying to calm my breathing when the key card slid into the door. Mark walked in, holding a new set of key cards. "All sorted," he said, smiling. He looked at me, a slight frown touching his lips. "You look flushed. Is everything all right?" Fine, I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Just a little warm in here. He accepted it. He saw what he wanted to see. A weak, overwrought woman, coming undone at the seams. He had no idea that a single sheet of paper was at that very moment printing out in an office across town. A message in a bottle that I prayed would bring the cavalry. The day after I sent the fax was the longest of my life. Every knock on the door, every ring of the phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was it Frank? Or was it Mark, having somehow discovered what I'd done? I lived on a knife's edge, maintaining my facade of fragile compliance while my mind screamed. Mark's behavior grew bolder. He began to talk openly about our future, a future that pointedly did not include me. He spoke of starting over, of finding peace after all this tragedy. He was no longer just planning my death, he was planning his life without me. He believed I was so sedated, so mentally checked out, that I was no longer a person but an obstacle to be managed. That afternoon, my old cell phone, which Mark had been keeping, rang from his briefcase. He glanced at the screen. "It's Frank Gable," he said, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Your dad's old friend. Why would he be calling?" My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. I had to play this perfectly. Mark answered, putting the call on speaker. "Mark Sterling." "Mark, it's Frank Gable. I'm so sorry to hear about the house and about Clara. I just heard the news. How is she holding up?" Frank's voice was calm, casual, betraying none of the urgency I knew he must be feeling. "Frank, good to hear from you, though I wish it were under better circumstances," Mark said smoothly. "It's been tough. Clara's taking it very hard. She's not really herself right now." "I can only imagine," Frank said. "Listen, the reason I'm calling, it's a bit of a delicate matter. Your father-in-law, before he passed, set up a small secondary trust for Clara. It's managed by my firm. With everything that's happened, I think it's prudent we get her signature on some updated paperwork. Just a formality, but it needs to be done." It was a brilliant lie, a perfect pretext. Mark's ears perked up at the word trust. Greed was his Achilles heel. "A trust? I don't think I was aware of that," Mark said, his voice sharpening with interest. "It's not large, but it's there," Frank continued. "I could pop by the hotel tomorrow, say around 3. It won't take long. Just need her signature on a few pages." Mark agreed immediately. A trust, no matter how small, was another asset to be controlled. He saw it as one more piece of my life to tidy up before disposing of me. After he hung up, he turned to me with a triumphant smile. "Well, that's a bit of good news, I suppose. Seems your father left you a little something extra." He didn't suspect a thing. He was so blinded by his own arrogance and greed that he couldn't see the trap being laid right at his feet. The next day, I took extra care with my appearance, choosing a simple dress, making myself look presentable but still subdued. I had to look like a woman capable of signing a legal document, but still fragile enough to be suggestible. The minutes leading up to 3 o'clock crawled by. Mark was antsy, pacing the room, already mentally spending the money from this newfound trust. At precisely 3, there was a knock on the door. Mark opened it to reveal Frank Gable. He was older than I remembered, with a full head of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He carried a leather briefcase. "Mark, good to see you," he said, shaking Mark's hand. "Clara," he said, his voice softening as he looked at me. His eyes held a flicker of recognition, of shared understanding. He knew. "It's good to see you, Frank," I said quietly. We sat at the small table in the room. Frank opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, bound in a blue cover. He was all business, explaining the legal jargon in a calm, professional monotone. Mark leaned in, listening intently, trying to assess the value of the documents. Frank had prepared a masterful stage. He handed me a pen. "Now, Clara, I'll need you to sign at the bottom of each page. Take your time." As I bent over the first page, my hand trembling slightly, Frank cleared his throat. "You know, Mark," he said conversationally, "this situation reminds me of a case I worked years ago. A house fire, initially ruled an accident. Gas leak just like yours." Mark stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "Is that so?" "Turned out it wasn't an accident at all," Frank continued, his gaze fixed on Mark. The husband had taken out a big insurance policy on his wife, tried to poison her first. When that didn't work, he staged the accident to cover his tracks. The thing about succinylcholine, it's a nasty substance. Breaks down in the body quickly, but not so quickly that a specialized toxicology screen can't find traces of it, especially if the lab knows what to look for. The color drained from Mark's face. The pen in my hand stilled. The air in the room grew thick and cold. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Mark said, his voice a low growl. "Of course not," Frank said smoothly. "It was just a strange coincidence that popped into my head. And another strange thing, the wife's sister was in on it, helped him manage the finances, keep the kid quiet. They both thought they had the perfect plan." Frank paused, letting the silence stretch. Then he looked directly at Mark, his friendly demeanor gone, replaced by the hard, unyielding stare of a seasoned detective. They didn't count on the kid being brave enough to send a warning, and they didn't count on the wife being smart enough to survive. It was no longer a conversation, it was an interrogation. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I think you should leave," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You're upsetting my wife." "I don't think so," Frank said, his voice flat. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out not another document, but a small digital audio recorder. He pressed a button. A tiny red light began to blink. "I think your wife has a few things she'd like to get on the record. Don't you, Clara?" This was my moment, the culmination of all the fear, the deception, the silent fight for survival. I looked up from the papers, my eyes meeting Mark's. The mask of the grieving wife fell away, and for the first time in days, he saw not his victim, but his accuser. The trap was sprung. Mark stared at the blinking red light on the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. The charming, grieving husband persona dissolved, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. "What is this?" he hissed, his eyes darting from Frank to me. "What are you doing?" Frank didn't answer him. He simply looked at me, his expression calm and encouraging. "Clara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Tell me what happened. Start from the beginning." I took a shaky breath, the air in the room feeling thin and sharp. All the fear I had suppressed for days threatened to overwhelm me, but then I thought of Leo. I thought of his terrified eyes, the desperate note he had pressed into my hand. That image gave me strength. I began to speak, my voice quiet at first, but growing stronger with every word. I told him everything. I started with Leo's text message, the 6 words that had saved my life. I described the explosion, Mark's unnerving calm, his immediate and certain declaration that it was a gas leak. I talked about the casserole, the unusual spice blend he had insisted I use. It was succinylcholine, I said, the chemical name feeling alien on my tongue. He researched it for months. He bought a vial of it online. He was going to poison me and make it look like a heart attack. Mark lunged across the table, his hand outstretched, not for me, but for the recorder. "You're insane, you're hysterical," he screamed, his face contorted in a mask of rage. Frank was faster. He intercepted Mark's arm with a strength that belied his age, his grip like iron. He pushed Mark back into his chair with a force that made the chair legs screech against the floor. "Sit down, Mark, and be quiet. It's her turn to talk." Mark slumped in the chair, breathing heavily, his eyes wild. The violence of his reaction was a confession in itself. I continued, my voice gaining momentum. I told Frank about being isolated, about Mark taking my phone and wallet. I described my horrifying discovery on his laptop, the saved articles about poisons, the email to Sarah outlining their contingency plan. "His sister Sarah is involved," I said, my gaze locked on Mark's. "She's holding my son." They coached him, terrified him into silence. They planned to have me committed, to make me seem unstable so that when they tried to kill me again, no one would question it. I detailed the faked panic attack, the tense visit to Sarah's house, the way Leo had secretly passed me the note. I told him about the pills Mark had been trying to give me, the constant gaslighting, the psychological torture of pretending to be a broken woman while fighting for my life. As I spoke, Mark's denials became weaker, more desperate. "She's making it up. She's been under a lot of strain. She's confused." But his words were hollow. The details I provided were too specific, too vivid to be the product of a grieving mind. They were the chillingly precise recollections of a survivor. "And the money, Frank," I said, my voice dropping. "It was all about the money, a $2 million life insurance policy. He told me it was responsible planning." At the mention of the insurance policy, Mark finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. It wasn't with remorse, but with the frustrated rage of a failed predator. "I had to," he muttered, his voice muffled by his hands. "We were ruined. We were going to lose everything. The house, the cars, our life. It was the only way." It was a confession, quiet, pathetic, and self-serving, but a confession nonetheless. The recorder on the table captured every word. Frank let the admission hang in the air for a long moment before he spoke. "The only way, you were going to murder your wife, the mother of your child, for money, and you call it the only way." Mark looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a venomous self-pity. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. She wouldn't have felt a thing. It would have been peaceful. I was doing it for the family, for Leo's future." The audacity of his justification was breathtaking. He had twisted his monstrous act into one of noble sacrifice. He truly believed his own lies. "You destroyed our family," I said, my voice cold and clear. "You and your sister. You terrorized our son. You did this for you, Mark, only for you." Frank clicked off the recorder. The silence that followed was absolute. He stood up, his movements deliberate. "I believe we have everything we need." He walked to the door of the hotel room, opened it, and nodded to someone in the hallway. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. They were young, serious, and their presence seemed to fill the entire room. Mark's head snapped up, his face a canvas of disbelief and horror. He finally understood. This wasn't just Frank Gable, his wife's old family friend. This was an official operation. He had walked into a meticulously planned trap and confessed his crimes to a retired detective with 2 police officers listening just outside the door. He tried to stand, to protest, but one of the officers stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Mark Sterling, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your wife, Clara Sterling, and for conspiracy to commit murder." The words of the Miranda rights, so familiar from television shows, sounded stark and brutal in the quiet hotel room. As they cuffed his hands behind his back, Mark's eyes found mine. They were filled not with hatred or remorse, but with a look of utter, pathetic bewilderment. It was the look of a man who had been so sure of his own cleverness that he simply could not comprehend his failure. He had seen me as a pawn in his game, an object to be removed. He never, not for 1 second, saw me as an opponent. And that was the mistake that had cost him everything. As they led him away, a profound, bone-deep wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. The monster was gone. The gaslighting was over. The truth, my truth, was finally out in the open, and it had set me free. The aftermath was a maelstrom of legal proceedings and flashing cameras. News vans camped outside the hotel, then later outside the courthouse. Our private tragedy became a public spectacle, a lurid headline. Local businessman arrested for attempted murder of wife. Sister implicated in poison plot. Mark and Sarah, stripped of their masks of suburban respectability, were suddenly notorious. Their downfall was swift and absolute. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Frank's recording of Mark's confession was the centerpiece, a chilling monologue of greed and remorseless calculation. Leo's testimony was heartbreakingly powerful. On the stand, he spoke with a quiet courage that filled the courtroom with a stunned silence, detailing how he had found the poison and how his father and aunt had conspired to silence him. My own testimony felt surreal, like recounting a horror movie that I had somehow survived. The financial records Frank's team uncovered told the rest of the story. A mountain of debt from reckless investments, foreclosures looming, a life of luxury built on a foundation of lies. Mark and Sarah, faced with irrefutable proof, turned on each other in a desperate, ugly bid for self-preservation. Sarah claimed Mark had manipulated her, that she was just trying to help her brother through a difficult time and had no idea of his lethal intentions. Mark painted her as a greedy co-conspirator who had pushed him toward the plan. Their accusations only served to cement their guilt, revealing the rotten core of their relationship. In the end, the jury took less than 4 hours to convict them both. Mark was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy. Sarah received a 20-year sentence for her role in the plot. Justice had been served, but there was no sense of triumph, only a profound, weary sadness. The real victory, the only one that mattered, happened in a quiet room at the Children's Services office, the day after Mark's arrest. It was there that I was reunited with Leo. The moment he saw me, he collapsed into my arms, the months of terror and forced silence finally breaking. He sobbed, great, shuddering breaths, and I held him, my own tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered into my shoulder. "I should have said something sooner. I was so scared." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said, holding his face in my hands and making him look at me. "You saved my life, Leo. Do you hear me? You are a hero as you saved me." We stayed like that for a long time, mother and son, 2 survivors clinging to each other in the wreckage of our lives. The healing was a slow, arduous process. Leo was plagued by nightmares and a deep-seated guilt he couldn't easily shake. He felt he had betrayed his father by telling the truth, a tangled knot of love and fear and duty that was agonizing for a 17-year-old to carry. We started therapy, both together and separately. We learned to talk, to listen, to navigate the vast, uncharted territory of our shared trauma. We had to rebuild our family from the ground up. A family of two, bound not by blood, alone, but by a trial by fire that had forged an unbreakable bond between us. The house, our home, was a crime scene, tainted by the memories of what had happened and what was supposed to happen there. I couldn't bear to set foot in it again. We sold it, along with everything in it, exorcising the ghosts of our past life. With legal documents and estate sale stickers, we moved into a small, bright apartment in a different part of the city. A place with no history, no dark corners. The kitchen was tiny, but it was safe. For months, the sound of an oven preheating or the beep of a timer would make me flinch. But slowly, with Elio's help, we began to reclaim the simple domestic rituals that Mark had tried to turn into weapons. We cooked together, simple meals at first, then more adventurous ones. Each meal we shared was a quiet act of defiance, a testament to our survival. We were reclaiming not just our lives, but our right to normalcy, to the simple, life-affirming pleasure of breaking bread together in safety and in love. I often thought of the man I had married, the man I had spent 20 years of my life with. I sifted through my memories, searching for the signs I had missed. Were they there all along? The subtle selfishness, the charm that was a little too smooth, the ambition that bordered on ruthlessness. I had seen them, I realized, but I had explained them away, reframed them as strengths. I had loved a carefully constructed illusion, and the man behind it had been a stranger all along. The greatest tragedy was not his betrayal of me, but his betrayal of his son. He had been willing to sacrifice Leo's mother, to orphan him emotionally and physically, all for the sake of money and pride. That was a sin I could never forgive. But forgiveness was not the goal. The goal was peace. And slowly, day by day, we were finding it. It wasn't a loud, dramatic peace, but a quiet, resilient one. It was in the sound of Leo's laughter as we watched a movie, in the easy silence between us as we read in the evenings, in the simple, profound comfort of knowing we were safe together. We had been to the edge of the abyss and had pulled each other back. Our life was not the one we had planned, but it was ours. And it was enough. Years have passed since that night. The glare of the media has long since faded, our story relegated to the archives of true crime podcasts and late-night television reruns. Life has settled into a new rhythm, a quiet melody composed of resilience and hard-won peace. Leo is a man now. He graduated from college with a degree in psychology, a choice he made, he told me, because he wanted to understand the complexities of the human mind, to help others navigate the darkness he had known so intimately. He carries the weight of his past not as a burden, but as a source of profound empathy. The terror of his 17th year forged him into a man of incredible strength and compassion. I see it in the way he treats people with a kindness and consideration that goes beyond mere politeness. He doesn't take trust for granted. He knows its value, and he knows how devastating its absence can be. Our relationship is the bedrock of my life. The bond forged in that crucible of fear and betrayal is unlike any other. We don't have to speak of what happened. It is an unspoken understanding that informs everything. It is present in the quick, reassuring glances we share in a crowd, in the extra tightness of a hug, in the simple, heartfelt way we always end our phone calls. I love you. We have built a new definition of family, one not defined by a house with a white picket fence, but by unwavering loyalty and the fierce, protective love of two people who saved each other. I never remarried. The thought of extending that level of trust to someone again felt impossible for a long time, but I am not lonely. I have a full life filled with friends, work that I find meaningful, and the deep, abiding joy of watching my son build a life of his own. I volunteer at a shelter for victims of domestic abuse, sharing not the details of my story, but the lessons I learned. I speak about the insidious nature of gaslighting, the importance of trusting your instincts, and the quiet strength it takes to survive unseen battles. Sometimes, late at night, I allow myself to think about Mark. He will die in prison. From what I hear through the infrequent reports of his parole hearings, all of which are denied, he has never shown a shred of remorse. In his mind, he remains the victim, a man driven to unfortunate actions by circumstances beyond his control. He is incapable of seeing the devastation he wrought. And Sarah, she was released a few years ago. She moved to a different state, changed her name. I have no desire to know where she is or what she is doing. She is a ghost, a phantom from a life that no longer belongs to me. Their betrayal, once an all-consuming fire, has faded to a dull, distant ember. It no longer has the power to burn me. The apartment we moved into after the explosion is still our home base. The kitchen is still small, but it is a place of warmth and creation. A few years ago, on the anniversary of that night, Leo came over for dinner. Without discussing it beforehand, we both knew what we had to do. We decided to make a beef casserole. As I chopped the onions and he browned the meat, we worked in comfortable silence. There was no fear, no hesitation. When it came time to add the spices, I handed him the containers of salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. He measured them out and stirred them in. We were not recreating a nightmare, we were overwriting it. We were taking back a piece of our history and cleansing it. As we sat down to eat, the fragrant steam rising from our plates, I looked across the table at my son. He was no longer the pale, terrified boy in his aunt's sterile living room, but a confident, compassionate man who had stared into the face of evil and had chosen love. He raised his glass of water. "To survivors," he said, his voice clear and steady. I raised my glass to meet his. "To survivors," I echoed. We ate the casserole. It was delicious. Every bite was a victory. It was a declaration that we would not be defined by the darkness we had endured, but by the light we had fought so hard to find. We had survived. And in the quiet, ordinary moments of our new life, we were thriving. The past is a part of our story, a chapter written in scars, but it is not the whole book. The rest of the pages are ours to write, and we fill them with love, with healing, and with the simple, profound, and unshakable truth that we are safe and we are free.